A flight attendant blew a whistle as a joke mid-flight. Seconds later, he was the one choking on silence by landing, and what happened next will leave you speechless. He blew a whistle into a baby's face, laughing as the child woke up screaming in terror. Subscribe if you believe no cruelty disguised as a joke should ever be excused. The first sharp cry pierced the cabin like a splinter of glass. Sharp, unexpected, and uncomfortable. It came from row 14, seat C, where Noah Mercer sat cradling his infant nephew, Eli. The plane had barely leveled off from takeoff when the baby's restlessness grew into agitation, his tiny fists clenched, his face flushed and scrunched in distress. Noah gently rocked him, whispering softly, but the change in altitude had clearly unsettled the child. Across the narrow aisle, a flight attendant named Blake Rudd paused mid-stride. He turned his head, lips twitching in irritation as the baby's cries continued. Blake's uniform, crisp and neat, didn't match the smirk that slowly formed beneath his mustache. He stepped closer, pretending to check an overhead bin. Then, as if confiding in Noah, he leaned in and muttered under his breath, "You know, back in the day, we had ways of quieting babies that actually worked." Noah looked up, startled. "Sorry?" Blake gave a low chuckle, but it lacked any warmth. Old-school techniques. You wouldn't know Noah forced a polite smile, assuming it was meant as humor. "He's just unsettled." "First time flying." But Blake's eyes lingered a second too long, a shadow flickering behind them. His smirk didn't return as he moved down the aisle, greeting other passengers with mechanical cheerfulness. Noah's gaze followed him for a moment, then returned to Eli, who was now whimpering softly into his chest. He adjusted the baby's blanket, his fingers moving with the kind of gentle precision only an engineer could master, measured, intentional, calm. Despite the commotion, the hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm, masking most of the noise. Passengers around Noah gave him sympathetic glances. A middle-aged man in 13B even offered a small smile, mouthing, "Don't worry about it." Noah nodded, grateful. But a few rows back, Blake's laughter erupted again, louder this time as he joked with two younger male crew members, his voice rising above the low murmur of the cabin. "Maybe someone should hand that kid a parachute," Blake said, just loud enough. Noah heard it. So did the man in 13B, who stiffened slightly in his seat. There was an awkward pause in the cabin, a shift in the energy, subtle but undeniable. Noah's heart beat faster. He didn't look up. He just pressed Eli closer and resumed his soft humming. "Easy, easy," he whispered to the baby, his voice low and steady. "We'll get through this." The irony wasn't lost on him. He, the unshakable one, the problem solver, now holding a crying child 30,000 feet in the air with no escape from scrutiny. But it wasn't the baby's cries that unsettled him. It was Blake. Noah had spent a lifetime reading environments, systems, reactions. That's what made him good at his job. And something in Blake's tone earlier. It hadn't been just annoyance. It had been disdain. The kind that bubbles up not just from inconvenience but from a deep, irrational sense of superiority. Noah's jaw tightened as he bounced Eli gently. The baby hiccuped, then started crying again, louder this time. It triggered another response. Blake, who had returned with a trash bag, turned sharply toward them. His shoulders tensed, his jaw clenched. "Sir, we do ask that passengers keep children calm during the flight," he said, voice louder than necessary. Noah blinked. "I'm doing my best." "It's the cabin pressure. He's just uncomfortable." "Maybe he needs to learn some discipline," Blake cut in, eyes cold. That made the businessman in 13B turn his head sharply. "That's enough," he muttered. Blake ignored him and turned on his heel, muttering something to one of the other crew members. Noah couldn't hear it, but he saw the nod. Then the chuckle. Eli's cries reached a new pitch, shrill and pained. Noah felt the baby's little body arch in discomfort, and it broke something in him. Not his calm, but his tolerance. He stood halfway, still holding Eli close, and flagged Blake down. "Could I speak with the lead attendant, please?" he asked evenly. Blake scoffed. "About what?" "I just need to request something directly. It won't take long." Blake leaned in, his tone low but venomous. "You can make your little complaints after we land. For now, sit down and keep your baby quiet." Noah didn't respond. He lowered himself back into the seat slowly, his mind now fully alert. That last line hadn't just been inappropriate, it was a threat dressed as procedure. He looked down at Eli, still crying in his arms, and made a silent promise. He would not let this slide. Not because of pride, not because of ego, but because that tone, that smirk, that mockery. It wasn't about one baby. It was about how easily power can become cruelty, how a uniform can give cover to arrogance, and how too often people let it pass. Not this time. Blake sauntered down the aisle again a few minutes later, avoiding Noah's eyes. He laughed with the other crewmen, making another vague comment about passengers bringing their problems on board. Noah didn't flinch. He sat there, eyes steady, bouncing Eli gently in his arms as if comforting the child but watching the flight attendant's every move. And in that silence, an idea began to form. Not loud, not rash, just precise. Sometimes, he thought, calm waters hide the deepest cracks. The sharp blast of the whistle cut through the cabin like a blade. Passengers flinched. Some instinctively raised their hands to their ears. The piercing note wasn't just loud, it was invasive, unnatural, cruel in its timing. Noah Mercer's breath caught in his chest as Eli, nestled in his arms, jolted violently and let out a shriek unlike any he had ever heard. It wasn't just a baby's cry, it was a cry of panic, terror. His small body went rigid, fists clenched, legs kicking out in confusion as if the sound itself had struck him. Noah blinked, stunned, his mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The silver whistle, still dangling from a thin black cord in Blake Rudd's fingers, gleamed under the overhead lights. Blake didn't flinch. Instead, he stood upright with a smug tilt to his chin, as if he just demonstrated some brilliant trick. Two younger male flight attendants, barely out of training by the look of them, snickered from the galley. "Told you," Blake said with a smug grin, twirling the whistle once around his finger before tucking it back into his uniform pocket. "Works every time." Protocol for sound-sensitive babies. The words hit harder than the sound had. Noah's arms tightened around Eli instinctively. The baby's cries didn't stop. They only grew louder, more frantic. His face flushed bright red, tears streaming freely, body trembling in Noah's grasp. Noah rocked him gently, whispering soft words near his ear, trying to soothe him, but his own heartbeat thudded in his throat like a war drum. The noise had triggered more than just Eli's panic. It had cracked something inside Noah, too. "What did you just do?" Noah asked, his voice low, trembling not with fear, but fury he was working hard to contain. Blake leaned in slightly, still wearing that lazy grin. "Saved you from another hour of screaming, friend." "No need to thank me." Noah stared at him. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, Noah turned to face the rows of passengers around them. Some were frozen in awkward silence, others whispering to one another. A man in business attire across the aisle furrowed his brow, watching with discomfort. A college-aged guy a few rows up tilted his phone slightly, recording discreetly. No one laughed. The air in the cabin had shifted. There was tension now, thick and pulsing like the vibration of a string pulled too tight. "I want to speak with the captain," Noah said, his voice clearer now, anchored by resolve. Blake's face hardened just slightly. "Captain's busy." "You can file a report after we land, if you're still on the flight." The words were quiet, muted, but sharp, deliberate. Noah heard them clearly, and so did the man in the next seat, who looked up sharply. The threat, casual as it was hung in the air like smoke. Noah didn't respond. Not right away. His brain was already spinning, analyzing, cataloging. He had always been the calm one in the family, the one who thought things through before reacting. But something about Blake's tone, the cruel amusement in his face, told him this wasn't just a bad joke or poor judgment. This was something deeper, a performance, a display of unchecked power. And worse, it had been done at the expense of a baby, his baby nephew. He glanced down at Eli, still trembling in his arms. The child was trying to settle, the sobs now softer but more frequent, his eyes wide and blinking. The damage was done, but the wound wasn't physical. It was fear, instilled, imprinted. Noah felt a sharp twist in his chest. That wasn't something a bottle or a lullaby could fix. Blake stepped away, swagger in his step, heading back down the aisle like he owned it. His shoulders relaxed, hands folded behind his back like he'd won something. He tossed a wink at the snickering attendants near the front, who chuckled again and resumed fiddling with plastic cups behind the beverage cart. Noah exhaled slowly and looked down again. "You're okay," he whispered to Eli. "I've got you." But inside, he was no longer trying to calm himself. Inside, something had shifted. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't uncertain. He was focused. He looked up as one of the male passengers leaned toward him, whispering just loud enough to hear, "That wasn't right. He can't get away with that." Noah nodded. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Then another voice, closer this time. A different flight attendant, mid-30s with a receding hairline and a quiet demeanor, paused beside his row. His name tag read Reed. He spoke without looking directly at Noah. "For what it's worth," he muttered, "that wasn't approved protocol. He's been warned before." Noah turned his head slightly. "Warned." Reed gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod. "He likes pushing limits. Thinks he's funny. Most of us keep our distance," and then he walked on, pushing the cart forward. Noah stared straight ahead, processing. So this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-time lapse. Blake had a history. And management, someone knew. But he was still flying, still in uniform, still carrying that whistle. His fingers itched for his phone. He shifted Eli gently, reaching for his pocket. His thumb hovered over the screen, then typed a quick note. Time of incident, approximately 4:17 p.m. Flight 482. Attendant, Blake Rudd. Weapon, crew whistle. Action, deliberate blast into infant's face. Witnesses, seat 14, B, 15C, 13D. Video being taken seat 12A. He saved the note. Then he took a breath. Years of discipline as an engineer had taught him how to prepare, not to panic. He didn't throw punches. He didn't shout. He didn't lose control. He calculated, designed, built responses the way he built systems, with logic, order, and an eye for consequence. Blake had no idea what he had just triggered. Noah's eyes drifted to the window. The sky outside was calm, faint streaks of orange from the sunset breaking through the clouds. But inside, a different kind of pressure was building. Not just cabin pressure, moral pressure, legal pressure, the kind that reshapes everything when released. He held Eli tighter. The baby's breath was slowing, eyes fluttering closed. Noah's jaw tightened. He didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but he knew one thing for certain. Blake Rudd had just blown more than a whistle. He had blown open a door. Some storms start with a single whistle. The shrill whistle blast still rang in Noah's ears as Eli cried uncontrollably in his arms, his small body trembling with fright. Noah rocked the baby gently, murmuring quiet reassurances, but nothing seemed to work. The sound had cut deeper than just noise. It had struck fear into the very core of the infant. The cabin buzzed with unease. Passengers whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Noah and the aisle where Blake Rudd strutted as if he had just delivered a masterclass in cabin control. From the row behind, a businessman in a navy blazer leaned forward slightly, his voice low but clear. "He can't do that," he said, more to himself than anyone else, but the tone carried the weight of moral certainty. Beside him, a younger man angled his phone subtly, the lens peeking just over the edge of his tray table. He was recording, quietly, carefully, capturing every movement Blake made. Blake paused mid-aisle, catching the motion out of the corner of his eye. He smirked, not the warm smile of a professional steward, but the smug grin of someone who felt untouchable. He turned his head just enough to glance at Noah, locking eyes for a moment. It was not a challenge. It was an invitation. Noah held the gaze. He didn't blink, but inside, something shifted. Every instinct screamed at him to stand, to call Blake out in front of everyone, to demand justice for what had just happened. But his hands were full, with a child and with responsibility. He couldn't afford anger. Not now. Not yet. He was not just a passenger. He was Eli's protector. And this was no longer about discomfort. This was about dignity. A shadow moved beside him. Noah turned just slightly, enough to catch the quiet figure of another flight attendant slipping into the row. He wore a tight, drawn expression, his jaw clenched like a man suppressing his conscience. He bent slightly, keeping his voice below the ambient hum of the plane. "I didn't approve that," the attendant whispered. "He's been warned before." The words landed like a hammer. Noah's eyes narrowed. He studied the man's name tag, Reed Keller. Something about the way Reed said it, low, sharp, and cautious, told Noah it was more than just professional disagreement. This was a man who had seen things, who knew this wasn't a one-time outburst. "How many times?" Noah asked quietly, his voice steady despite the pulse rising in his throat. Reed hesitated. His eyes darted down the aisle to where Blake had stopped to chat up another passenger with over-the-top cheer. "Enough," he replied, "but they always brushed it off. Said passengers overreact. Said he's just old school." Noah nodded once, absorbing the weight of that answer. It wasn't just misconduct. It was a pattern, a system, a design that allowed people like Blake to move unchecked beneath a polished uniform and a rehearsed smile. The seatbelt sign blinked on suddenly, followed by the captain's voice overhead announcing mild turbulence ahead. The plane rocked gently. Blake stumbled slightly in the aisle and barked, "Everyone stay seated," as if relishing the excuse to issue a command. His voice, loud and sharp, echoed too closely to the whistle he had blown minutes earlier. Noah gritted his teeth, watching Blake catch himself and continue down the aisle like nothing had happened. That stumble, brief as it was, showed something. Blake could be rattled. He wasn't invincible, and perhaps he wasn't as confident as he liked to appear. Eli's sobs had lessened now, though his breaths still hitched with every small movement. Noah stroked his nephew's back gently, his eyes distant but calculating. He leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling of the aircraft as if seeing through it. His mind, trained by years of engineering discipline, began clicking through steps. Problems had solutions, and this one would be no different. He began to mentally document the scene. Time of incident, description of the tool used, tone and words spoken, witnesses rouse. He needed evidence. He needed structure. Emotion couldn't drive this, but it would fuel it. Reed had slipped away, disappearing into the service galley. Noah took a deep breath and checked his phone, pretending to scroll as he opened his notes app. He didn't want to forget a single detail. Not one phrase, not one smirk, not one moment where the line had been crossed. A creak of the overhead bin snapped his focus back. A bag had shifted. He reached for Eli's bottle and adjusted the blanket wrapped around the infant. Around him, the passengers were settling into a strange hush, a silence made not of peace, but anticipation. Something had changed. A collective awareness had taken hold. The man with the phone recording gave Noah a small nod when their eyes met. It was subtle, but it was solidarity. Blake passed by once more, whistling softly, an off-tune, mocking echo of the blast he had delivered earlier. His hands behind his back, his head slightly tilted like a performer taking a final bow. But this wasn't an act. This wasn't theater. This was real, and someone was going to be held accountable. Noah exhaled slowly through his nose, his jaw tight. Every fiber of his being urged action, but he knew, deeply, instinctively, that retaliation in haste would only play into Blake's hands. Number. This required strategy, precision, exposure, not explosion. The plane jolted again. Nothing dangerous, but enough to jostle drinks and draw quick gasps from a few passengers. Blake caught himself, again barking out a command to stay seated. His mask slipped slightly, just a flash of irritation behind his eyes, but Noah caught it. That was the crack. Eli let out a small whimper, curling into Noah's chest, finally beginning to settle. And in that rare silence, with the cabin dimmed and the clouds brushing past the windows outside, Noah leaned forward ever so slightly and whispered to himself, a promise low and sharp. He doesn't know who he just challenged. Blake passed again, whistling, softly this time, almost mockingly, as if replaying his earlier stunt with smug pride. The sharpness of it cut through the low hum of the cabin like a razor, taunting Noah with every shrill note. Eli stirred in his arms, whimpering from residual distress, and Noah's grip instinctively tightened around the baby's back, protective and steady. He didn't look up at Blake, didn't grant him the satisfaction of a response. Instead, his hand moved slowly into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone with practiced calm. He opened the Notes app and began typing. 1,540 hours. F.A. Blake Rudd, whistled loudly in baby's face, passenger row 14. Remarks included, protocol for sound-sensitive babies. No apology offered. Witnesses observed, row 14, A, 14B, 15C, 13D. Cabin crew laughed. Tone, mocking. He paused, glanced up at the cabin with narrowed eyes, and continued. Behavior consistent. Ongoing harassment includes soft whistling during aisle walk, repeated visual intimidation, no intervention from crew lead. Note: complaint history unknown. Passenger response: unease visible. Several whispering Noah's thumb hovered over the screen, then dropped another note. Action required upon landing. The logic of the moment calmed him more than any breath ever could. Facts were his domain. Documentation was his language. For years as an engineer, he had designed systems where failure wasn't an option. Now, that same mindset turned inward. This wasn't just an unpleasant incident. It was data. And Blake had given him plenty. A quiet cough from his left interrupted him. Reed Keller, the younger crew member who had earlier shown subtle disapproval, was walking slowly down the aisle. He didn't stop, didn't speak aloud, but as he neared, his hand brushed the edge of Noah's tray table and slipped something down, a folded napkin. Reed didn't even break stride as he moved past. Noah unfolded it with one hand while gently patting Eli's back with the other. Written in hurried slanted ink was a phone number and 5 words. Crew Services. Internal. Before PR Noah looked up, his eyes briefly meeting Reed's as the attendant turned near the galley. A nod, barely noticeable, confirmed it. Reed knew this wasn't new, and Noah suddenly understood. He wasn't the first, just the one who might finally act. His mind shifted again, moving from incident to architecture, from emotion to strategy. He copied the number into his phone, deleted the original note, and tucked the napkin into Eli's diaper bag, disguised beneath toys and formula packets. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Eastridge City shortly. Please ensure your seat backs and tray tables." Noah barely heard it. His fingers were already moving again, this time crafting a message, not to the airline, not to customer service, but to his brother, Evan Mercer, Federal Air Transport Inspector. A name Blake Rudd didn't know and would soon regret learning. Noah's message was short, measured, laced with the precision of a man who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. Boarded Meridian Flight 482. Witnessed misconduct. Need your arrival team ready? He hit send. Eli stirred again, and Noah cradled him tighter. Around them, passengers who had remained awkwardly silent earlier now gave nods of support, quiet glances of recognition. Someone across the aisle whispered, "We saw it." That wasn't right. A man in 13A angled his phone just enough to show that he, too, had been recording. Blake passed again, grinning. "Hope the little guy's enjoying the flight," he said smugly, tapping the overhead bin with his knuckle like he was ringing a bell. Noah didn't answer. He looked past the man, out the window. The sky beyond was streaked in dusk blue and orange. The wing flexed slightly in the breeze, but in the reflection of the window he saw his own eyes, calm, calculating, utterly changed. The man who had boarded this plane hoping for a quiet journey was gone. What remained was someone dangerous in his own way. Not violent, not reckless, strategic. He had the crew member's name, the witnesses, the number, the recording, and now the right man on the ground to receive it all. Blake Rudd had made a fatal mistake, not with his whistle but with his arrogance. He had believed his uniform granted him immunity, his behavior excused by policy, his mockery tolerated as humor. But Noah Mercer wasn't here to complain. He was here to design consequences. As the plane began its slow descent and the city lights sparkled in the distance like embers waiting to ignite, Noah's phone buzzed once. A single-word reply from Evan. Received. Noah looked down at Eli, who had finally drifted into a light, uneven sleep. His chest rose and fell with tiny breaths, unaware that his uncle had just set something powerful in motion, something Blake could neither control nor predict. Outside the window, the sky continued to darken, but inside seat 14C, a different kind of clarity had arrived. Sometimes, vengeance doesn't shout, it arrives with precision. Blake Rudd's fingers hovered inches above the silver whistle clipped to his chest as he made his final walk down the aisle. The aircraft's engines hummed beneath the cabin like a warning drum, steady and rising. Noah Mercer watched from seat 14C, his infant nephew Eli cradled against his chest, the child's breathing shallow but steady now. Blake's shoes clicked against the flooring with smug rhythm, his eyes scanning seatbelts not for safety, but for control. He stopped beside Noah's row, tilting his head slightly and smirking like a performer ready for his curtain call. "Hope your little noise machine enjoyed the show," he muttered with a mocking grin, his voice low enough to seem private but loud enough to invite discomfort. His eyes flicked toward Eli, then back to Noah, challenging him. Noah didn't blink. He held Blake's gaze with a quiet stillness that felt heavier than anger. Around them, passengers tensed, sensing that the undercurrent of this moment was different, sharper, colder. The earlier incident still hung in the air like static, unspoken but unforgotten. Blake leaned in closer, his lips barely inches from Noah's ear. "You'll forget this ever happened," he whispered, his breath hot and smug. Noah's voice, when it came, was a thread of steel. "I don't forget," he said. "I design outcomes." The words were soft but carried weight, echoing louder than any threat. Blake froze for a beat, as if processing the tone more than the words themselves. But then he scoffed and moved down the aisle, brushing his hand across the seats like he owned the sky. Up ahead, the landing gear engaged with a mechanical groan, jolting the aircraft slightly. Passengers shifted in their seats, tray tables locked, windows bright with the last light of afternoon. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers announcing final descent. But Noah didn't hear it. His entire focus tunneled onto Blake's next move. Blake turned at the end of the aisle. As if choreographed, his hand reached up toward the whistle. He had no idea. The moment Blake's fingers grasped it, Noah was already standing. In one swift motion he stepped into the aisle. There was no pause, no warning shout, just pure, calculated motion. His hand shot out, and before Blake could react, Noah seized the whistle midair, his grip firm, unwavering. Gasps scattered through the rows like sparks. Blake's eyes widened in disbelief, caught between indignation and panic. He tried to step back, but Noah was faster. With deliberate precision, he raised the whistle, pressed it firmly against Blake's lips, not with violence, but with the kind of quiet assertion that came from a man who had made a decision long ago. "You like making noise?" Noah asked, his voice low and steady, every syllable delivered with surgical clarity. "Then hear it from the inside." Blake flinched, stumbling back as if the whistle had burned him. The smirk was gone, replaced by the stunned expression of a man whose power had just been stripped from him in front of a full cabin of witnesses. Eli stirred slightly in his blanket but didn't cry. Around them, no one moved, no one spoke. The silence was so deep it felt physical, like a pressure in the air before a storm breaks. Blake's hand twitched at his side, unsure whether to push back or retreat. But Noah stood there, unshaken, staring at him not with rage, but with an impenetrable calm that unnerved more than fury ever could. Behind them, a young man in a business suit murmured, "He's going to do something," just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. Heads began to turn. Passengers leaned out into the aisle, eyes flicking between Noah and Blake. One man raised his phone slowly, capturing the moment with trembling hands. Blake, realizing the attention, tried to salvage control. "Sit down," he snapped at Noah, voice cracking. "You're out of line." But Noah didn't respond. He simply turned the whistle over in his hand once, then let it drop back into Blake's palm like discarded trash. Blake caught it clumsily, but the damage had already been done. The moment, the power dynamic, the silent judgment from every row, all of it had shifted. Outside the window, the runway neared. The wheels beneath them trembled, preparing for contact. Blake stood frozen in the aisle, breath shallow, sweat blooming beneath his collar. Noah returned to his seat, adjusted his jacket, and cradled Eli as if nothing had happened. The baby nestled into his chest, trusting and quiet. As the aircraft touched down with a solid jolt, the passengers remained hushed. But in their silence, something had changed. Respect had replaced doubt. Dignity had replaced fear. And Blake, once the loudest man in the cabin, now found himself swallowed by the weight of his own silence. By landing, justice had already boarded. The moment the aircraft thudded to a halt at Gate C9, a ripple of confusion surged through the cabin. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts before the chime even sounded, jolted not by urgency to disembark but by the scene unfolding in row 14. Blake Rudd staggered backward, his face contorted in shock and disbelief, a glint of silver protruding from his mouth. Noah Mercer's hand still raised from the calculated motion that had ended with the whistle half jammed between Blake's lips. A stunned hush washed over the cabin like an airless fog. Blake coughed violently, stumbling into the beverage cart, eyes wide with panic as he clawed at his mouth, gagging and gasping for breath. The whistle clinked against his teeth before he bent over and spit it onto the floor, saliva trailing in its wake. He collapsed to his knees, heaving in shallow, rasping breaths. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the smirk. In its place, a red-faced shell of a man, trembling with confusion and fear. Across the aisle, Noah remained still, seated, his posture erect, one arm wrapped securely around baby Eli. The child whimpered faintly, his tiny face buried in the fold of Noah's jacket. There was no triumph in Noah's expression, only the unnerving calm of a man who had delivered justice without needing to raise his voice. "You blew that in a baby's face," Noah said evenly, his voice neither loud nor angry, but razor-sharp. "Now, you'll remember what it sounds like when someone blows back." The words sliced through the cabin and silence shattered. Several passengers leapt from their seats, not toward the exit but forward, surrounding Noah's row like an impromptu tribunal. Blake tried to rise, hand raised, but was immediately met with furious voices. "We saw it! He did it on purpose? He laughed when the baby cried." Their anger erupted not in chaos but in solidarity. A businessman from row 15 blocked the aisle. "Don't let them twist it," he muttered to others. "He's not the threat." From the rear, two younger attendants, ones who had earlier chuckled at Blake's joke, now stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene. But the crowd's stance made the choice for them. Any movement toward Blake would be met with resistance. Blake, now fully upright but trembling, lunged toward the intercom panel near the galley, slamming the call button with a shaky hand. "Captain, this is Rudd. We need immediate assistance," he gasped into the handset. "Assault in the cabin. Requesting security now." But only silence answered him. Then static. Then nothing. The captain's voice, so calm and routine moments earlier, did not reply. Blake's eyes darted around the cockpit door as if waiting for it to open, but it stayed sealed, unmoving, unhelpful. Behind Blake, Noah quietly stood, gently adjusting the baby in his arms. He walked toward an older man near the window, someone who had earlier offered a warm smile during boarding. Without a word, Noah passed Eli to the man who took the infant with both arms like a sacred trust. Noah nodded once. Then he reached into his coat pocket and retrieved his phone. Blake flinched as Noah stepped into the aisle. "Stay back," Blake barked. "I'll file charges, do you understand me?" "This is a federal." Noah said nothing. Instead, he unlocked his phone and tapped the screen. With one swipe, he opened his voice memo app and pressed play. The cabin filled with sound. The whistle shrieked first, sharp, piercing, unnatural. It cut through the hush like glass shattering. Then came Eli's scream, raw, terrified, unmistakably human. Finally, Blake's voice. "See. Works every time. Protocol for sound-sensitive babies." Passengers froze. The laughter from the crew members echoed faintly in the background, followed by Blake's smug chuckle. In that moment, the recording didn't just play sound. It played truth. It played arrogance. It played cruelty. Passengers began recording again, phones raised, lenses trained on Blake. Some stood taller, others covered their mouths. One man near the rear muttered, "Unbelievable." Blake's complexion turned ghostly pale. His mouth opened, searching for a defense, but none came. He reached for the intercom again, but this time, his hand dropped uselessly to his side. Noah stepped forward, his voice a whisper but firm enough to carry. "You called it protocol," he said, locking eyes with Blake. "Let's see how your airline defines it now." And as the plane sat motionless at the gate, the whistle's echo still hung in the air. Justice doesn't always roar, it echoes. The cabin doors hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, and a hush fell over the once chaotic airplane. The tension that had been simmering throughout the flight now surged as uniformed officers stepped into the aisle, tall, composed, and unmistakably coordinated. At their head was Evan Mercer. His dark suit fit with quiet authority, and his badge glinted against the morning light pouring in from the terminal windows. He didn't bark orders or raise his voice. He didn't need to. The moment his boots touched the plane's floor, control shifted. Passengers gasped and murmured, a ripple of realization passing through the rows. Some stood halfway before sitting back down. Others pointed instantly toward the front of the cabin where Blake Rudd stood frozen, his confidence evaporating like steam on cold glass. Blake's fingers twitched near his side as if searching for a place to rest, a shield, something. But there was nothing. Not anymore. Evan raised a single hand, palm open. "Silence, please," he said, his voice clear, level, and sharper than steel. The noise stopped instantly. Eyes turned to him with relief, anger, curiosity, and for a few, hope. "We'll be reviewing footage and recordings," he continued, pacing slowly, his gaze scanning the space like a heat-seeking beacon. No one is to exit the aircraft until formal statements are collected. This is now a federal investigation." Blake flinched as if struck. He took a single half-step forward, his mouth twitching into what he likely thought was a disarming smile. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding," he said hastily, trying to inject humor into his voice. "It was just a joke." A little loud, maybe, but not serious. Just got out of hand, Evan stopped mid-step. His eyes locked onto Blake's with the precision of a scope. He took one long breath before replying. "You blew a high-decibel whistle into an infant's face," Evan said. "That's not a joke." "That's assault." Blake's smirk vanished. His hands hung uselessly at his sides. The entire plane seemed to lean in. The silence was broken only by the soft hiccup of baby Eli, still snuggled in Noah Mercer's arms. Noah sat in his seat, unmoving, the child pressed gently to his chest. His eyes never left Blake, not with fury, not with hate, but with a quiet, relentless gravity, the kind that made men rethink the weight of their actions. One by one, passengers began to speak up, their voices rising with urgency. "I saw it happen. He didn't care at all," said the man in 14B, standing halfway and turning toward Evan. "He laughed when the baby screamed," another voice from the rear added. Others murmured in agreement, nodding, their eyes blazing with moral clarity. One elderly man reached across the aisle and grasped Noah's hand. "You stood up for all of us," he said, his voice low but firm. "He deserved what came." Evan nodded slightly and motioned for the officers to move forward. Two stepped around him, reaching Blake in seconds. The flight attendant didn't resist. He couldn't. His eyes flicked around the cabin in desperation, searching for someone to back him up. None did. Not the passengers, not the other attendants, and certainly not the one who stepped out of line next. Reed Keller. The soft-spoken attendant had remained near the galley for most of the landing, keeping his head down, but now he moved with purpose. He passed the other crew members, brushing shoulders without apology, and walked straight to Evan. "There's more," Reed said under his breath, voice barely audible. But Evan turned toward him instantly, sensing the weight behind those two words. He's done worse before. And the company knows. Management's been covering for him. Evan's jaw tightened. "You sure?" he asked, though he didn't doubt it. Reed nodded once. "They've buried the reports." "I've filed 2 myself." Evan glanced toward Blake, who now stood in handcuffs, staring blankly at the seatback in front of him. A man who had spent years hiding behind the protection of procedure and uniform was now stripped of both. This flight was no longer about a single act of cruelty. It was a doorway to a larger failure, one that reeked of corporate neglect, silence, and rot. Outside, the glare from terminal windows bounced off the metal handcuffs as officers began to escort Blake down the aisle. His shoes scuffed loudly against the floor. The passengers watched him pass with a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. Noah stood now, still holding Eli close, his back straight and steps deliberate. As Blake walked by, he turned slightly, not to gloat, but to watch, to witness. He didn't need to speak. The gravity in his silence spoke louder than any courtroom accusation. As the last of the passengers gave their statements and the cabin began to empty, Evan stood near the exit, arms crossed, eyes focused. His mind was already turning toward subpoenas, audits, reports, everything that would follow. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. And as Noah stepped out of the aircraft into the waiting terminal, a strange, almost solemn quiet hung in the air behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because inside that cabin, a reckoning had taken root, one born not out of rage, but out of resolve. Sometimes one man's courage exposes a company's conscience. The flight attendant claimed it was protocol, blasting the whistle again while mocking the crying infant. The uncle watched in silence until justice had to speak louder. If you believe every act of cruelty must be answered, hit subscribe now. Justice starts here. The sound of footsteps echoed through the sterile terminal corridors as the passengers of Flight 482 were guided into a private holding area for questioning. Security officers directed them toward a cluster of folding tables where Evan Mercer's federal inspection team, dressed in crisp Navy uniforms, stood ready with tablets, evidence bags, and sharp, attentive eyes. The air buzzed with tension, whispers, nervous glances, the soft clicking of phones replaying the incident that had just rocked a routine flight into something unforgettable. Noah stood near a wall, gently rocking baby Eli in his arms. The infant had finally fallen asleep, his tiny fingers curled into the collar of Noah's jacket. But Noah's mind was far from calm. His eyes scanned the room, catching glimpses of passengers sharing their stories with investigators, some gesturing toward the sky, others pulling up videos on their phones. Each account, each flicker of outrage, added weight to the growing tide of truth. In a glass-walled interrogation room nearby, Blake Rudd sat in a chair, his wrists cuffed in front of him, pacing like a restless predator now locked in a too-small cage. His usually smug face was pale, his jaw clenched tightly as if biting back panic. The illusion of control, once wielded arrogantly down the airplane aisle, had shattered the moment the flight door opened and reality stepped in, wearing a badge. Grant Delmar arrived moments later, moving like a man used to being obeyed. His suit was spotless, his shoes polished, his expression unreadable. With one glance through the glass, he stepped inside the interrogation room, nodding briefly to the officers posted outside. The door clicked shut behind him. "I need 10 minutes," he said coolly, placing a leather folder on the table. Inside the observation booth adjacent to the room, Evan Mercer watched through a two-way mirror, arms crossed, face unreadable. A surveillance tech beside him adjusted the audio, letting every word come through clearly. Blake stood the moment Grant entered. "Thank God," he muttered. "They're trying to make me into some kind of monster." Grant didn't respond right away. He opened the folder and skimmed a document inside. Finally, without looking up, he said, "We'll frame this as a stress-induced lapse in judgment. You've had a tough season, delays, overwork. You snapped," Blake blinked. "That's not what happened." It's not about what happened," Grant cut in sharply, his voice calm but cold. "It's about what we say happened." From behind the glass, Evan's gaze sharpened. Grant continued, lowering his voice as he leaned over the table. "We'll control the narrative. Stress, exhaustion. You were provoked by an unruly passenger. The baby's cries disoriented you. You acted with the child's safety in mind. Misguided, but not malicious. Got it?" Blake hesitated, swallowing hard. "Will that work?" Grant's eyes narrowed. "It has before." At that moment, Evan pushed open the observation room door and stepped into the interrogation room without knocking. The sudden interruption startled both men. The officers at the door straightened but didn't intervene. Grant recovered quickly. "Mr. Mercer," he greeted, voice slick. "Didn't realize we were being monitored so closely." "Cover-ups," Evan said flatly, stepping toward the table. "Our lapses, too. And we'll uncover every one of them." Blake looked between the two men like a trapped animal. His confidence had started to crumble, but now it dissolved completely. "This is getting blown out of proportion," he said quickly. "It was a whistle. That's all. It's not like You assaulted an infant," Evan said sharply, "on federal transportation. That's not a lapse. That's a violation of Federal Safety Code, Section 237B. It will not be buried in paperwork or polished away by PR." Grant straightened, the smooth mask of professionalism returning to his face. "We're all interested in the truth, of course," he said with a dismissive wave. "Let's not dramatize." Without a word, Evan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. He dropped it onto the table between them. The sound echoed. Grant raised an eyebrow but opened it slowly, revealing a printed list of prior passenger complaints, all against Blake Rudd. Each line documented with a date, a flight number, and a small code stamped in red. Dismissed. "I believe you already know what this is," Evans said. "You signed off on 2 of them." The color drained from Grant's face. Blake leaned forward, eyes scanning the list, his mouth opening but forming no words. For a moment, the room was silent, suffocating in its clarity. Outside, Noah stood near the glass wall of the holding area, holding Eli close. Through the transparent panel, he could see Evans' silhouette, tall and still. Then he saw the folder, the printed list now lying open on the table. His heart thudded once, hard. He knew then that this wasn't just about what had happened today. Blake wasn't a rogue actor. He was a symptom of a culture that had failed again and again, and hidden it behind procedure. That quiet realization hit like a wave, colder than anger, sharper than fear. He had thought he was fighting one man, but now he saw the truth. The enemy was bigger. It wore ties and cufflinks. It sat in boardrooms and hid behind protocols. And it had let people like Blake stay in the sky for far too long. Noah's fingers gently brushed Eli's soft hair. The baby stirred, but didn't wake. Somewhere in the room, another passenger raised their voice, offering another statement. The walls were closing in on the airline now, and the siren wasn't far off. Noah didn't smile. He didn't need to. It started with a whistle, he thought, but it'll end with a siren. The video went live at 6:37 p.m. It had been filmed by a passenger 3 rows behind Noah and uploaded with a simple caption. "This happened on my flight today. This is not okay." Within minutes, the clip spread like a wildfire tearing through dry grass. Social media platforms flooded with reposts, comments, and hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Eli. Hashtag Whistle Assault. Flight 482. The infant's terrified screams, followed by the piercing whistle and Blake's cruel smirk, struck a nerve with millions. News channels picked up the footage almost instantly. "Flight attendant assaults infant with whistle, caught on camera," read the breaking banners. The clip played on loop. Blake's arrogant smirk, the baby's cry turning to a wail, and Noah's stone-still expression, a man holding back a storm. In an emergency press release, the airline called the incident a misunderstanding caused by heightened stress during an active route, claiming the attendant's actions were not reflective of company policy. But their words rang hollow. The public saw what they saw. Not stress, but cruelty. Not a misunderstanding, but a choice. Inside the airport's investigation wing, Evan Mercer sat at a long table, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight. His team flanked him, reviewing the growing pile of digital evidence, passenger recordings, transcripts of Blake's previous infractions, and the internal training manual. Across from him sat Reed Keller, the junior flight attendant who had quietly supported Noah on the flight. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed with guilt and fear, but his voice remained steady. "He's done this kind of thing before," Reed said, staring at the floor. "Not the whistle, but mocking passengers, children, elderly folks. Once he shoved a man's cane and called it a tripping hazard. We filed reports. Management ignored them." Evan leaned in. "Why?" Reed met his gaze. "Because Blake made passengers obey." He knew how to intimidate without technically breaking rules, and the company liked that. They called it creative discipline. He pulled a crumpled printed email from his pocket and placed it on the table. They encouraged it. Silence fell over the room. Noah stood by the window, cradling Eli in one arm, the baby finally asleep against his chest. The sun outside had set, casting long shadows across the sterile room. But inside Noah's mind, things were blazing. He watched as the weight of Reed's confession rippled through Evan's team. Officers scribbled notes, heads nodded grimly, and screens lit up with notifications of escalating public pressure. "I didn't want to get involved," Reed added quietly. "But that child, your nephew, what he did to him, it wasn't just wrong. It was evil." Noah nodded once, the expression on his face unreadable. Then he turned toward Evan. "You said I have leverage," Noah said, his voice low but steady. "What exactly does that mean?" Evan hesitated only a second before responding. "Right now, the airline's entire reputation is on fire. If we push hard, we don't just punish Blake. We force structural change, their crew policies, their response systems." Everything. Noah was silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Then let's redesign it from the ground up." Evan stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. "These are the internal memos we intercepted. They buried complaints about Blake, reassigned the people who pushed too hard. One file even shows a senior manager signing off on dismissing a passenger assault claim because, quote, the footage didn't show serious harm." Noah's hands curled into fists. "And now?" Evan looked him straight in the eye. "Now, the footage shows everything." As the night deepened, reporters camped outside the terminal. Civil rights lawyers, aviation experts, and parenting groups joined the growing chorus online. Influencers, senators, and even celebrities began demanding accountability. Inside, Evan's team worked with quiet urgency. Reed gave a full statement. Passengers submitted affidavits. The airline's official inbox crashed from public complaints. Blake, meanwhile, remained in holding, shielded for now by legal silence. But something had shifted. This wasn't just about a whistle anymore. It was about a system, a culture that had allowed cruelty to wear a uniform. And now that culture had a name staring it in the face, Noah Mercer. Later that night, as the last document was signed and the final passenger statement reviewed, Evan turned to Noah and said, "You're the one who started this. You don't have to stay in it." Noah shook his head. "I'm not here for punishment. I'm here for permanence." He stepped out into the cool night air, Eli still asleep against his chest. Outside, floodlights lit the tarmac in pools of white and shadow. Planes came and went, unaware that one of their own had triggered a reckoning. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Noah didn't flinch. He just whispered, "When a man of reason stands against chaos, reform becomes inevitable." The conference room was cold, far too cold for comfort, intentionally so. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above a long polished table that reflected the strained faces of the airline's executive team. Noah Mercer sat at one end, alone except for a leather-bound folder resting at his fingertips. He did not fidget. He did not lean back. His spine was straight, his gaze calm but unwavering. Across from him sat 5 men in tailored suits, each wearing the same forced composure that cracked at the edges. One cleared his throat, another adjusted his tie, though it was already perfect. The chairman, an older man with slicked-back gray hair and thin lips, folded his hands and offered a tight smile. "We want to thank you for meeting with us, Mr. Mercer," he began. "We deeply regret what occurred on Flight 482. It was unfortunate, and we understand your family has endured a great deal." Noah said nothing. The silence stretched long enough that the chairman glanced toward the others, looking for support. Finally, the executive to his right leaned forward and slid a thin envelope across the table. "We've prepared a compensation offer," he said. "Substantial, we believe. It includes a public apology and coverage of any medical costs. We hope this can begin the healing process. For everyone." Noah stared at the envelope for a long moment, then slowly pushed it back. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and even. "You can't buy silence when a child's scream still echoes." The words cut through the room like glass breaking. One of the younger board members shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The chairman's smile vanished. For a moment, no one moved. Then the door opened. Evan Mercer entered, dressed in his federal transport uniform, crisp and commanding. He carried a thick binder of documents and laid it flat on the table with a deliberate thud. No introductions were made. The executives knew exactly who he was. "These are the documented internal complaints you've received over the last 5 years," Evan said, flipping the binder open. 37 in total. 16 involved the same crew member. All dismissed. All buried. The executive with the tie gave a strained chuckle. "Those were reviewed thoroughly at the time. Stress on long-haul flights is—" Evan cut him off. "Spare me. I've already spoken to DOT regulators. If reform isn't implemented immediately, your operating license will be reviewed for suspension." The room went still again, but this time with a different kind of silence, one made not of discomfort, but dread. The chairman leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "What is it you want?" Noah looked up, expression unreadable. "Change." He reached into his folder and pulled out a set of papers, drafted meticulously with bullet points and legal framework. He slid them forward. "This is a proposed passenger dignity charter," he said, his voice calm but with an edge that demanded attention. "It requires body cams for crew, strict disciplinary guidelines, noise sensitivity training, and passenger rights protocols. No more loopholes. No more hiding behind policy." The board members leaned in, reading. Murmurs began. "This is too aggressive," one whispered. "We'll never get the union on board," said another. Evan remained standing, arms crossed, his silence a weight that pressed down harder than words. The room was cornered. The chairman steepled his fingers and studied Noah for a long time. "You're asking us to rewrite decades of procedure based on a single flight." Noah's response was immediate. "I'm asking you to protect every future passenger from what my nephew went through. If you can't do that, you don't deserve to fly." That was the turning point. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke in defense anymore. The older man finally gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Fine," the chairman muttered. "We'll implement it." All of it, Noah didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small, clear evidence bag. Inside, it was the silver whistle. The same whistle Blake Rudd had used. The same whistle that had triggered a firestorm. He set it on the table, the soft click of plastic on wood sounding louder than it should have. "Keep this," Noah said. "It's not a weapon, it's a reminder." No one touched the bag. As Noah stood and turned to leave, the door opened again, this time revealing a throng of reporters beyond the glass walls. Flashes went off, microphones extended, voices called out. "Mr. Mercer, do you have a statement? What happened inside? Do you feel this is a victory?" Noah paused only briefly, meeting their questions with a gaze firm and steady. "Justice isn't revenge, it's repair," he said. Then he walked past the cameras, his footsteps quiet against the polished floor, his resolve louder than any sound. And sometimes, the loudest message is delivered in silence. The automatic doors of Terminal 4 slid open with a soft hiss as Noah Mercer stepped inside, the hum of the airport immediately wrapping around him like static. He paused for a moment, eyes scanning the concourse where crowds moved in predictable, pulsing patterns, businessmen rolling suitcases, families herding toddlers, pilots nodding to one another in silent rhythm. But what drew his attention wasn't the noise or the crowd. It was the banner overhead, freshly hung across the walkway. "Respect is not optional." The words struck with silent weight. Below the banner, mounted beside Gate 17, was a gleaming silver plaque etched with a new logo, the Mercer Initiative, for human dignity in flight. It was strange, seeing his name branded onto a movement that had grown far beyond him. Yet Noah felt no pride, only purpose. He adjusted Eli's carrier over his shoulder, the toddler now asleep against his chest. The boy's soft breath, steady and rhythmic, was the only reassurance Noah needed that healing was possible. But that healing hadn't come easily. Weeks earlier, the sound of a dropped spoon in their kitchen had sent Eli into a screaming panic, trembling so hard Noah had to cradle him for nearly half an hour. Even now, any sharp sound, a door creaking too fast, a kettle's whistle, made the boy curl into himself like a threatened animal. Noah had learned to move silently around the house as if every motion was a negotiation with memory. At night, he became a student of calm. He downloaded endless white noise loops, tested lullabies on soft speakers, even recorded his own voice reading bedtime stories in low, melodic tones. Every evening, as the world darkened outside their windows, he sat beside Eli's crib and rewrote the boy's association with sound. He replaced fear with familiarity, panic with peace. But as he passed through the terminal now, something felt different. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the reason the rules had changed. A man in uniform approached from a side corridor, tall, sharp-featured, and familiar. Evan Mercer, clipboard in hand, nodded as he spotted his brother. "They finished it last night," Evan said, his voice calm but edged with satisfaction. The final review passed. The passenger dignity charter is now national protocol. Noah didn't speak at first. He just let the words settle. He looked past Evan at a nearby digital display. It was looping a safety video, and this time it showed something new. Flight attendants fitting body cameras onto their vests, a narrator's voice explaining, "Every action, every word, recorded for accountability." Another frame showed a training simulation with crew members practicing de-escalation techniques. "It's real now," Evan added, noticing his brother's silence. "Not just Meridian." 3 other airlines announced voluntary adoption this week, and Reed, he's heading the national training program, said he never thought a whistle could change a whole industry. Noah exhaled slowly, finally allowing a flicker of something close to relief touch his features. "He deserves it," he murmured. He stepped forward when no one else would. Evan nodded, his expression softening. "He said you were the reason he did." Their conversation was interrupted by a small voice stirring against Noah's chest. Eli shifted in the carrier, eyelids fluttering as he stirred from his nap. Noah gently rubbed the child's back until the fidgeting stilled. "There's still work to do," Noah said, his voice low. "Airlines will change their policies, sure, but changing culture, that takes more than rules." "That's why we created the Mercer Initiative," Evan replied, stepping aside as they began to walk again. "It's not just a name. It's a reminder. For them. And for us." As they passed a series of new training rooms, Noah noticed large screens inside displaying modules labeled Sound Sensitivity Simulation, De-escalation Practice, and Infant Passenger Care. Trainees sat attentively, heads bowed as instructors played recordings of real passenger interactions, pausing often to explain what should have happened instead. One instructor stood at the front of a class with a diagram of an airplane cabin projected behind him. "A moment of humiliation is a lifetime of trauma," the man said to the room. "Your job isn't just to serve, it's to safeguard." Noah lingered outside the glass wall, watching the young recruits absorb each word. He saw in their eyes something he hadn't seen in Blake Rudd's: humility, a willingness to learn, to listen. Eli stirred again and reached up with a small hand, grasping at the air. Noah smiled and adjusted the carrier so the boy could see out toward the runway, where a plane began to ascend against the pale afternoon sky. "I've been thinking," Noah said, still watching the horizon. "Maybe I'll finally take that trip I promised Eli. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with no announcements or alarms. Just peace." Evan smiled faintly, sensing something closing, something bigger opening. "You earned it," he said, "but something tells me you're not done yet." Noah turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. "You know how to design outcomes," Evan added, repeating the words from that unforgettable descent. "And a lot of people still need someone who can." Noah didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked again at the banner above the concourse and at the logo bearing his name. Not for fame, not for revenge, for every child too small to fight back, for every passenger who thought they had no voice. As they approached the exit, a small child walked past holding his father's hand, blowing gently into a plastic whistle. The sound was soft, playful. Eli didn't flinch. Noah looked down, eyes misting faintly, and pressed a kiss to the top of his nephew's head. Justice, once airborne, never lands quietly. Blake Rudd flinched as the courtroom doors swung open and the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." The judge entered with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen decades of broken promises, teary pleas, and bitter denials. But today felt different. The gallery was full, packed with reporters, passengers from Flight 482, former crew members, and quiet citizens who had seen the now viral footage of a whistle blown into an infant's face. The sound still haunted many of them. Some came seeking justice, others came to witness what justice even looked like. Blake shuffled forward, shackled at the wrists, dressed in a gray suit 2 sizes too big. His eyes darted nervously across the room, searching for sympathy. Instead, they found cold stares and folded arms. He looked older than he had on the plane. The once cocky grin was gone, replaced by a twitch in his jaw and a glint of desperation. He took his seat beside his defense attorney, who leaned over and whispered, "Stick to the script. Play the remorse card." The judge responds to humility. Across the aisle, in the second row, sat Noah Mercer. Noah didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He simply sat with Eli's toy rattle clutched in one hand, silent, steady, and watching. There was no smugness, no vengeance in his eyes, only resolve. Every moment in this courtroom, every breath he took, was for Eli. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here to make sure that what had happened aboard Flight 482 would never be repeated. The prosecution's opening remarks cut clean and sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor began, what began as a mid-air moment of cruelty quickly turned into a national conversation because of one thing: proof. Not hearsay, not exaggeration, not opinion. Proof. A baby cried. A man in uniform, who was supposed to ensure safety, chose to silence that child by blowing a high-decibel whistle into his face. The act was not only reckless, it was sadistic. Blake shifted uncomfortably as the prosecutor played the recording again. The courtroom went still. Eli's cries echoed from the speakers, followed by Blake's unmistakable chuckle, and then the sharp blast of the whistle. Some spectators winced, others muttered under their breath. Blake looked down. His attorney stood and began the defense. "Your Honor, Mr. Rudd was under immense stress. He was dealing with fatigue, an understaffed flight, and disruptive behavior. He does not deny the whistle was blown, but he believed it to be harmless. He had no intention of causing trauma. Mockery of innocence is no defense," the judge interrupted, voice low but firm. "It's a confession." The courtroom froze. The defense attorney's mouth clamped shut. Blake stared ahead in disbelief. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "I've reviewed the footage. I've read the statements. I've considered the context. But one thing remains unchanged. Your actions caused harm to a defenseless child. Your tone, your expression, your words, none of them point to a man under stress. They point to a man enjoying power. That enjoyment ended today." He paused, then delivered the verdict with chilling finality. 18 months incarceration for endangerment. Permanent ban from aviation-related employment. Sentencing begins immediately. Gasps rippled across the room. Blake blinked in disbelief as the bailiff approached. The shackles clicked tighter. He turned as if to look for someone to rescue him, and his eyes locked with Noah's. Noah stood, every camera in the room tilted toward the moment. Blake hesitated, expecting anger. He braced for words of rage, for a verbal blow that would humiliate him even further. But when Noah stepped forward, His face remained unreadable, calm. Noah stopped just short of the defendant's bench. He looked at Blake, not with hate, but with a stillness that made everyone hold their breath. "You taught me how dangerous a single sound can be," he said quietly, voice even. "I'll spend the rest of my life teaching others the power of silence." Blake's shoulders sagged. He looked away. The guards led him out of the courtroom. The heavy doors closed behind him. That night, the news didn't focus on Blake's sentence. They focused on the man who never raised his voice, never sought the spotlight, and never backed down. The headlines read, "Engineer turns whistleblow into aviation reform," and "Mercer delivers justice with silence." But to those who had been there, who saw it unfold with their own eyes, one quote became etched into memory, repeated again and again on news clips and radio loops. "Mercy isn't weakness, it's mastery." Noah Mercer stepped into the Meridian Training Center with steady, deliberate strides. The sliding glass doors closed behind him with a soft hiss, sealing off the outside world as if it too acknowledged the weight of the moment. Inside, the polished white floors shimmered under the soft glow of ceiling lights, and glass-paneled walls reflected rows of trainees standing in quiet formation, dressed in navy blue uniforms. Every face turned as he entered, their expressions caught between admiration and anticipation. Noah didn't smile. He gave a small nod and continued walking down the central aisle, his footsteps the only sound in the hush. Reed Keller stepped forward from the front row, his hand outstretched. "Welcome back, sir," he said, his voice low but full of meaning. Noah took his hand, firm and steady. "Good to see you again, Reed." Reed's eyes flicked toward the stage at the far end of the hall. "They've been waiting for this all week," he said, a trace of pride in his voice. "Most of them joined because of Flight 482. Noah didn't answer right away. His eyes settled on the large screen behind the stage, where the tribute video had just begun to play. The opening shot was of a still image, Noah seated with Eli in his arms, mid-flight. The image slowly faded into a silent video montage. Blake Rudd's smirk, the silver whistle in hand, the shocked faces of passengers, and finally, the moment when Noah stood with unshaken resolve as airport security filed into the cabin. Each clip was overlaid with quiet instrumental music, but it was the silence between images that struck the room hardest. Evan Mercer approached from stage left, his presence crisp and composed. His suit was pressed, his badge gleaming beneath the overhead lights. "They're ready," he said under his breath, gesturing to the podium. Noah inhaled once through his nose, then stepped forward. The room stilled. Every eye locked onto him. He didn't use notes. "Every reform you see today," Noah began, his voice even, began with a cry. The silence in the hall seemed to lean closer. A cry that someone thought was too small to matter. He paused, letting the words settle, scanning the sea of young men who would carry the weight of tomorrow's skies. Never underestimate the sound of truth. The applause was not immediate. It rolled in like a tide, building until it filled the hall with thunder. Noah stepped back, his face still composed, though his eyes glimmered faintly with the weight of the moment. Evan clapped once, hard, before leaning into the microphone. "I am proud to announce," Evan said, his voice carrying clear authority, "that the federal government has officially adopted the Mercer Protocol as standard across all national air carriers. Passenger dignity is no longer a suggestion, it's the law." The audience erupted again. This time, Noah allowed a slight smile to touch the edge of his mouth. Later, as the crowd dispersed and Reed led trainees back into their debriefing rooms, Noah stepped out into the open corridor that overlooked the airstrip. The glass walls gave a wide view of the tarmac below, where planes taxied slowly toward the runway. A quiet hum filled the space, a mix of engines and wind and soft chatter in the distance. "Uncle Noah," a small voice rang out. Noah turned just in time to see Eli, now a beaming toddler, rushing toward him on short, excited legs. The boy's cheeks were rosy, his arms outstretched. He barreled into Noah's knees and held tight. Noah crouched to meet him. "Hey, buddy." Eli's hands fumbled with something behind his back. Then, with a wide grin, he held up a small toy whistle, bright red and shiny, its plastic surface catching the afternoon sun that poured through the windows. "I got this for you," Eli said proudly, holding it out. Noah stared at it for a long moment. The past flickered behind his eyes, the sound that had once shattered a baby's calm, the trauma it left behind. And yet, here was the same object, transformed by innocence into something new. He took the whistle gently, turning it over in his hand. Then he looked into Eli's bright eyes and said softly, "No more noise, little one. Just peace." Outside, the sun gleamed off the runway, where planes ascended gracefully into the blue sky. Sometimes the smallest sound can start a revolution. He thought noise made him powerful. Seconds later, that same whistle was lodged in his throat. If you stand for dignity, justice, and accountability, subscribe now. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of arrogance, cruelty, and the instant consequences of mocking those who can't fight back. Its purpose is to raise awareness, provoke reflection, and inspire empathy, justice, and accountability in the face of disrespect and abuse of power.